Welcome to the Pylon to Pylon podcast, where we love football and hate your opinion, with another edition of Between the Pylons, brought to you by Pylon to Pylon podcast. This is your host, Skyler Burkhart, and this week we're joined with Michelle Bruton from Aussie.com, sports editor and reporter for them. How are you doing today, Michelle?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. So we're going to kind of break down Packers this week. I know I'm a huge Rams fan. A lot of people on the podcast know that. Michelle's actually sports writer. Her favorite team is actually the Packers and used to write for them for Fansided, now for Aussie.com. So we're going to kind of go in depth about the matchup this week and also review some of the Packers over the season here and their last week's game against the 49ers. With that being said, we're going to jump right in with the review of the Packers versus 49er game. Michelle, what did you really like about that game with the Packers?
The end. That was both, I think, as just someone who writes about sports, but also someone who is a Packers fan. It was a really frustrating game to watch. I think you saw the Packers had that 17-7 lead early on. And as we've seen a lot of times this season, the offense just kind of sat back on its heels and the defense was completely unable to protect the lead. And so, a ragtag 49ers team led by Beathard, in relief of Jimmy Garoppolo, should not be able to put up, 14 points, 10 points, 3 points. Like they just kept the hits coming all night long. And I think, I think by now anyone, Packers fan or otherwise, like anyone who's watched Aaron Rodgers knows, like, you don't go to bed in games like that if they still have a chance. And sure enough, they engineered one of their brilliant 2-minute drives, came back, won the game. A lot of that was due to Kevin King's perfectly timed interception with 1:07 left. But that's one of those games where, like, you feel like you might just want to go to bed, but if it was any other quarterback except Aaron Rodgers, maybe you would, but you just know that he has the ability to pull that out. And one of the things I tweeted afterwards was, why don't the Packers just play every game like it's a constant 2-minute drill? Because clearly that's the only way that they can get things clicking.
No kidding. Aaron Rodgers and his 2-minute drives are incredible. I remember watching the tail end of that game because I didn't get to catch the beginning. And Aaron Rodgers looks over to Mike McCarthy at 6 seconds left on the clock and points one more because they were going to kick the field goal. And he shoot him off, said one more, and he pulls off that miracle touchdown to win the game. I can't even believe how he pulled that off.
Well, and given, as we all saw, given what happened with Mason Crosby the week before, not a bad choice to get a little bit closer. Obviously, that was the yips for sure. He got in his own head. But it was a little bit of a scary thought that this game would come down to Mason Crosby's leg. And I think as much as Aaron, I think, has been, a really upstanding teammate to Mason. You saw him sort of comforting him after everything kind of went haywire last week. But I think everyone on that team, from Rodgers to McCarthy to even Crosby himself, were sort of just glad that, he didn't have to kick it even farther than he did.
Yeah, definitely. With the Green Bay Packers sitting at 3-2-1, are you really worried about how the record is right now? They kind of seem to come off to a slow start this season. Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's definitely worrisome. I have been saying that all year just because I haven't necessarily liked what I've been seeing out of them. Packers Twitter always freaks out when I say that. And it's funny because I tend to be a pretty optimistic person. But I'm also a realist. And looking at this team, it's a very scary situation for Packers when right now they're, the division is weird because, like, the Bears by default lead at 3-2 because they haven't played their 6th game and because they haven't tied. But then you have the Packers and Vikings right there with that crazy 3-2-1 countdown record. And then you've got, of course, the Lions at the bottom. But, the NFC, part of the reason that I think the NFC is so much more fun to watch than the AFC is that you've got so many contenders right now. And the Rams, who I know we'll get to later, are pretty much the only team that have kind of run away with anything. The Saints are looking really good at 4-1. But we're still in a situation where, the Panthers could come surging back. The Vikings could come surging back. The Bears could inexplicably stay atop the NFC North. We don't know who the Seahawks are really yet. The Eagles are somehow in 3rd place in their division. I don't think that's going to last for long. So you now have, an NFC race that looks really, really tough. And, half the field is still very much in it. And if you're the Packers, yes, winning is ultimately the most important thing. If they could just get to the postseason and give themselves a shot, sure, anything could happen. They've got Aaron Rodgers, but they haven't set themselves up very well to do it so far.
What have the Packers done well this season so far? What have you seen?
So I think the thing that's most promising to me is obviously the way that the young receivers have come along. I mean, you went into a game last night where you're missing Randall Cobb, you're missing that veteran experience. You're missing Geronimo Allison, who's been like a really big spark for them. And so you're taking guys like Equanimous St. Brown and Marquez Valdez-Scantling, maybe people who only watch primetime football or only watch their team haven't heard of until Monday night. And you've got guys like Jamon Moore, you've got a lot of players who are trying to prove themselves. So I've been really encouraged with what I've been seeing from the pass catchers. Obviously, Devontae Adams has honestly had the most touchdowns of anyone in the NFL since, I want to say it's 2016, which is amazing. So pass catchers, I think, have been looking really great. Obviously, you'd hope Jimmy Graham would find the end zone a little bit more, but you can't argue with he had over 100 yards on Monday. I'm also really impressed that despite some injuries on the defensive line, I really liked the way that they've kind of held things together. Dean Lowry has looked really good, really strong. Obviously, Mike Daniels is a force. So I think the defensive line has been a strength for sure. The 49ers did put a lot of running yards on the Packers, but I wouldn't necessarily put that on the defensive line. I'd put that more on the inside linebackers and the safeties. And then obviously these young cornerbacks, you look at someone like Kevin King, who basically turned that entire game around for the Packers in one play. That's a stud move, and he's looked really good. And Josh Jackson has obviously looked pretty good too. So there is, I've seen that. I don't remember exactly who tweeted it. I want to say it was Peter Bukowski. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but someone tweeted, there's too much talent on this Packers team for them to be looking like this or for them to have this record. And I saw someone else respond and say, I don't see the talent. And that's crazy. I mean, I think anyone can see that there's a lot of individual talent on this team for whatever reason when it comes down to, just like executing on the field, making sure they stick to their assignments, doing what they need to do. A lot of that is just falling apart. And I think, the logical conclusion you might draw from that is that a lot of it's the coaching.
Yeah, definitely understandable. On the flip side of it, what don't you like about the Packers playing so far this year? I mean, there's been a lot of slow starts. Obviously, the injury to Aaron Rodgers isn't helping with a lot of Packers fans out there. What haven't you liked so far?
Yeah, the slow starts will kill you. I mean, falling into 21-0, 17-0, those 14-0, those types of holes are really hard to come back from. And they really limit what you can do in terms of your, run pass selection. And I think one complaint we've seen a lot this season is that Mike McCarthy has been really stubborn about getting Aaron Jones involved, to kind of everyone's, confusion and horror, because he's been pretty solid. He did drop a pass on Monday night, which maybe leads you to think that McCarthy is seeing things that the armchair, GMs aren't necessarily seeing in practice. But I do think the balance between the run and the pass has been really thrown off by these slow starts. And ultimately, until the Packers can start out strong, I mean, they did in this past game. And even then we didn't see Aaron Jones maybe as much as people would have wanted, but that's something I think right away that they need to fix if they can come out strong. We're going to get to see a lot more creative play calling from this offense, because obviously Mike McCarthy is going to have more of his tools sort of available to him, and not just get stuck trying to play catch up. Other things I haven't really liked, obviously, safety has been a really big problem. And granted, there's been some injuries there, but you look at someone like Kentrell Bryce, he's given up now 3 long touchdowns. He gave up that 67-yard one to Marquise Goodwin. HaHa Clinton-Dix has also looked pretty bad this season. He has had a few big plays, which can sometimes be sort of like a shiny bow to distract you from kind of everything fundamentally underneath that. But he'll kind of struggle to kind of stick to his assignments, or perform throughout the game, but then like he'll do something like in this past game, he was the one who kind of like got Beathard off his rhythm, who then like threw a poor pass to Goodwin, who then like King came in and intercepted it. So once again, Clinton Dix comes in and has a really great play, and people are like, oh my God, yay. He forced a fumble, which was great, but ultimately the safety play has been really, really bad. And I think that's one of the weakest, if not the weakest spots on this team.
Do you think Clinton Dix gets moved come towards towards the later part of the season? They make a change or anything? Or do you think he's just kind of going through a slump right now?
It's a pretty long slump if it's a slump, because a lot of these problems date back after sort of having a breakout year. He really hasn't performed up to that level. I think they'll probably exercise his full contract, but I don't think they'll necessarily like to trade him, because I don't know that he would be a big commodity on the market. I don't necessarily know that they would just cut him. But I'm not sure he's going to be, unless he really turns things around, I'm not sure he's going to be a candidate for an extension when the time comes.
Yeah, I mean, he's been really consistent throughout his career, even though starting off pretty decent early and then just kind of fallen off and been one of the weaker spots to this Packers defense. They definitely need to upgrade at that position at some point.
Absolutely.
On the flip side, let's go to the main star of the Packers with Aaron Rodgers. After week 1 against the Bears where he hurt his knee and came back, are you still worried about that knee? Even after the bye week, he said he wants that brace off, but it's going to get evaluated and see what they decide come towards the end of the bye week.
Yeah, so I think with a comment like that, which I know he made that comment on a radio show, you always have to wonder kind of what's the end game there. Is he sort of trying to pressure or broadcast or telegraph something to the Packers medical staff, which very well he may be, which is fine. He can say that that's his intention. Obviously, they're going to need the scans to back that up. But I think it's frustrating because in the Lions game, he had a lighter brace, which gave him a little bit more mobility, and then he took a pretty scary fall on that knee. And so you saw in this game, he came out with that huge bulky brace, which, for someone who's as mobile as he is, I have to imagine that it's awful trying to run in that huge thing on your knee. And in this game, towards the end of the game, you saw there was one play where like he went down and he tried to get up and he was limping. He was pulling the brace up. There was blood all over his white long sleeves, like on his elbow. And the man just looked ragged. And you have to just wonder, how much can he keep doing this to himself? And, as long as the knee continues to heal, his health is of the utmost importance to this team. This team, might not even sniff the playoffs with an injured Aaron Rodgers. And so, ultimately, if he wants to have the brace off after the bye, that's great. I think the bye comes at a really good time this week, but ultimately, of course, the team is going to be thinking about the long game, not sort of his immediate concerns. And, if he can't get it off after the bye, hopefully at least he can move back down to that lighter brace that gives him a little bit more mobility.
Do you think he's one of those players where he has a more severe injury than what he's leading on to and he's just playing through it and the medical staff's keeping hush? Or do you think it's just a minor injury that's kind of nagging at this point?
So I think, if the Martellus Bennett drama taught us anything, and sort of the resulting fallout from his claims, I think this medical staff is pretty forthcoming. I don't think that he is so valuable and he just signed such a huge contract extension that I don't think they'd be letting him out there if it was worse than they're really letting on. Obviously, that's just my opinion. But ultimately, I think he's a competitor. He's someone who's proven in the past that he doesn't mind playing when he's banged up. And at this point, I think it's the medical staff's, obviously their responsibility to sort of protect him from himself and make sure that they're taking the proper precautions, based on the timeline they're setting from the scans and the examinations.
Yeah, definitely. I understand. Aaron Rodgers is a tough guy. He always likes to play through injuries. That's why he came back in week 1 against the Bears. Even though it was a little dazed, but he was like, I'm going to finish this out and win the game, which he did.
Whenever he gives a post-game press conference, all I can think about is my knee.
My knee hurts, but I'm not going to play like it is. But with the Packers' number 1 wide receiver, Aaron Rodgers' favorite target since Jordy Nelson's kind of left, not Devontae Adams, we're going to go with old reliable and Randall Cobb. He hasn't really been a great receiver over his career with the Packers. Where do you see his future going forward?
Yeah, so it was interesting this off season. It seems like it sort of came down to a Nelson or Cobb situation. The team, wanted to try to move Nelson. I think they felt like there wasn't going to be a dance partner available if they tried to put Cobb out there with his contract. I don't think anyone wanted to pick that up. So I have been very outspoken about how I feel about what they did with Nelson. I think it's an insult that they didn't even offer him offered him nothing more than the veterans minimum. But that's neither here nor there. They decided to keep Cobb around. And I think, you're right. I don't even know at this point, I don't think you can call him his favorite target. Davante Adams has been targeted almost twice as much as any other receiver this year, which is insane. And I think it's pretty clear that he's become the de facto number one guy. And I think you're also seeing, especially given the way the league's been changing, that, you don't necessarily need a guy like Randall Cobb to be sort of a specialist slot guy, because someone like Davante Adams and even Jordy Nelson before he left are super effective in the slot. And obviously you want some more perimeter receivers so that you have the option to move those guys into the slot. But with Cobb out, as he's been, Davante Adams has actually been killing it in the slot. And so he's just showing that he's all around, really versatile. And so Cobb's contract expires in 2019. The last one that he's on now is a 4/40 deal. Obviously, he's not getting anything like that to sort of play out the rest of his career. And, I think he's had a really great career with the Packers. I don't doubt that, we know he and Rodgers are really, really close off the field. But given all the young talent they have with St. Brown and Valdez-Scantling and Geronimo Allison, and given their sort of ability to target and develop strong receivers in the draft, that's always been one of their strengths. Even with Ted Thompson, he's still there in an advisory role, and that was always one of the things he did well. I think that probably this will be the last season he plays in Green Bay, if I had to call it now.
Do you think they'll try to make a push to trade him before the season ends? I mean, the last 2 years, he hasn't even sniffed 700 yards receiving the last 2 years.
Yeah, so that's tricky, and he's injured. So I think that it'd be really hard to trade him before the deadline. I think there are always teams out there who are desperate, but I think probably at this point, they just let him play out the rest of his contract. If they can get to the postseason, him helping Green Bay, possibly, right now it feels a little crazy to say that they have a chance at the Lombardi Trophy, but hey, crazier things have happened. What a way to go out for him, if that's how it goes. But yeah, I don't necessarily see them trying to move him, because if they weren't able to do it this offseason, I don't know why they'd be able to do it now. I think that probably he just plays out his contract and then leaves in free agency.
I kind of feel like Randall Cobb was one of those players that was over-evaluated during his career, because looking at his numbers now, he's only scratched 1,000 yards only once, and I believe that was the year Jordy Nelson was hurt. So I think it's kind of like, is he really worth the money that they paid him on the last contract?
Right. He's a role guy for sure. He's someone he's probably not going to be a 1,000-yard receiver just based on kind of the game that he plays, which for the Packers for a long time was really sort of a versatile tool to have in their toolbox. But yeah, I think ultimately that contract, they weren't quite ready to part ways with him then. And that's kind of what it took. And that was the time we saw slot receivers were actually getting like a ton on the open market. And now I think the league has changed so much. Running backs are so involved in the passing game. You can put big guys in the slot now. You can put tight ends in the slot. You can put fullbacks in the slot like we've seen the 49ers do with Juszczyk. So I think that the style of game Cobb plays just isn't as valuable now as it was when he signed that contract. And already I think the contract was a little too rich probably for what he brings,
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Moving on to the other wide receivers on the Packers, how do you like them going forward? Do you think this is a group that Aaron Rodgers is going to grow going forward? Do they move some of them? Who's staying on this team going forward?
Yeah, I think, Davante Adams is someone who I think they're going to pay basically whatever it takes to keep him around. He's clearly the number one guy. He's got an amazing chemistry with Rodgers. He's able to kind of come up with those big plays. After him, actually, Jimmy Graham has the second highest receiving yardage on the team. I think he's someone who now the time in his career where if they wanted to try to keep him around longer, I don't know that it would be as expensive for them. And obviously we all know that they've always been missing an impact tight end since Jermichael Finley. But then you get down to, so many of these young guys like Geronimo Allison and Valdez-Scantling and even Ty Montgomery when he's used in the passing game, Equanimous St. Brown, Jamon Moore, you've got so many options. And I think all those guys have sort of flashed at different times this season. And given the injuries to Cobb and Geronimo Allison, other people have been able to step up and show what they can do. And I really liked some of what we saw from both Valdez-Scantling and St. Brown against the 49ers. So ultimately, I think they've got a really great group there. I think they should feel sort of excited to move forward with that group. And obviously, they're a team that's always going to be looking for wide receiver talent in the draft. But thankfully, they've been able to find it pretty deep. So I think they've got a pretty good core set for the next couple of years.
They're one of those teams that draft wide receivers late and they hold on to them for a couple of years and then they start and then they look like an all-star, like they should have been playing a few years earlier.
Right.
I mean, every time. Devontae Adams, one of them, Jordy Nelson, all these people just kind of slow start. You don't really see much of them. And all of a sudden, third to fourth year, they put him in there right there with Aaron Rodgers and bam, he's a star.
Yeah, James Jones is one of my favorite examples of that. They struck gold with him.
No kidding. I mean, every wide receiver in Packers history, you always remember one special play that they've done. There's never one that you can't remember. It's like, oh, he was an impact player because Aaron Rodgers makes them.
Right.
So moving on to the next one, are you worried about the Packers defense on the flip side of the ball here because they are not performing as well as ever? The Packers defense has never been known as a great defense, and it looks like we're kind of seeing that again this year.
Yeah, so I think, when you're looking at the Packers defense, it's kind of like before 2010 and after 2010. Because, I think a lot of people forget that 2010 squad was really, really strong. It was one of the top squads in the league and obviously was a huge reason why they were able to win the Super Bowl against the Steelers. But since then, whether it's been drafting, whiffing in the draft, execution on the field, or whether it's been coaching, I mean, obviously I think we can all agree now that the Packers 10 since that really great Super Bowl winning team, this defense just hasn't been anything to write home about. And going frustration. I mean, you've seen how many draft picks the Packers have used on secondary players over the last few years. And, they might have hit something with Kevin King and Josh Jackson, which is great. But ultimately, I think Clinton Dix has been a bit of a disappointment. Their safeties have been all over the place. I think it was a really big mistake to let Micah Hyde go. He was probably their kind of most talented sort of jack of all trades player. And I think that really hurt them. I think a lot of people were really upset when they let Casey Hayward go as well. And that's kind of the problem is I think the Packers have been able to draft some rising stars, but they haven't always made the right decisions about which ones to kind of keep in the fold. And ultimately, they've had to devote a lot of their cap space to keeping their offensive stars around. But I think those two defensive players are the ones a lot of people would tell you they made a mistake letting go. And as for the unit they've got now, sure, you've got some studs, but a lot of guys, I hate to say it, but someone like Clay Matthews, his name sort of precedes him at this point. And so they're really lacking a, talented pass rush. And I think you, as someone who follows the Rams really closely, can tell anyone about how important it is to have sort of a lights out pass rush, especially in the league as it is right now.
No, it's definitely important to have a pass rush. I mean, Clay Matthews' name precedes him. He's good in commercials, but on the field, he's just not living up to what he was in 2010.
Yeah. And it's, and Nick Perry has had, he earned his way back after the Packers didn't exercise his fifth-year option. He had a prove-it year. He earned, a roster extension and he's looked good, but you really need to, at this point, you really can't have, sort of like a one half unit. You really need to have two lockdown pass rushers. So I think between the issues at safety, the issues at pass rusher, and Blake Martinez is great, but even a little bit of issue on the inside linebacking core as well. It's just, this isn't really a unit. I mean, you look at some of the teams the Packers have ahead of them. Obviously they have the Rams coming up. They've got the Patriots coming up. These are not teams that you can take a mediocre defense into the game and expect to walk out with a win.
No, I definitely agree. A lot of the schedule gets harder for the Green Bay Packers going forward, and their division's no pushover like it usually is. The Vikings are actually starting to pick up on their defense, so that's something to worry about as well. Their offense, with led by Thielen and Diggs, is incredible. It's hard to stop. And then you also have Detroit, where they have Galladay now that's really coming out as a really good wide receiver as a third option. So Green Bay Packers have a lot to worry about.
Yeah, definitely.
So to kind of wrap up the Packers defense talk here, they're right now sitting at 11th ranked defense in yards allowed. So they're not doing on the bad side of yards allowed. So it looks like they're starting to get a little bit better coming forward. What is the big change you need to see coming forward to kind of help their odds of winning going forward?
I think I think you have to win up. If you've got a team like the Rams coming up, that is going to be sort of a dual threat, especially the way that she calls his plays. You have to be able to defend the run and the pass. And I think that, ultimately that game is probably going to cause their yards allowed to go up quite a bit more. But I think they've got to get it done up front, which they just haven't been. And they've really got to figure out sort of how to get the most out of their safeties over the top. They've just had way too many plays where a safety's taken the wrong angle or has whiffed and has just given up huge yardage plays. And obviously, if you've got teams that can go deep, like the Rams, like the Patriots, like the Vikings, that's going to kill you every time. So I guess the two things I would say from them are, bring the heat up front and sort of lock down that safety play.
Awesome. So that kind of brings us into our next topic. We're going to week 8 preview because the Packers don't have their next week, so they're on their bye. So we're going to kind of preview that game, Packers versus Rams for week 8. What do you expect from the Packers in this game?
So I think, I don't think that Packers Twitter would freak out if I were to say that. I think the Packers are probably going to take an L here. The Rams, as we all know, are undefeated at 6-0. I don't think the Green Bay Packers of 2018 are going to be the team that brings their party to an end, unfortunately. But, if this can be sort of a gutty game for the Packers, if they can learn some things about themselves or develop some character, I think that could be really important for them. So ultimately, I think, a lot of this depends on if Aaron Rodgers is still wearing that brace and how he feels on that knee. If they can open him up, have him rolling out, have him being mobile and just doing what he's so good at doing, I think he can keep the Rams defense on its toes a little bit. But I think, and this might sound crazy to say, you might laugh, but normally you think of the Rams, you think of sort of that incredible defense. And you would think like, oh, okay, in this game, it's going to be Rams defense versus Packers offense. Like that's going to be the big story here. But ultimately, this Packers offense, yeah, it's sputtered at times, but it's also shown that it can be transcendent. I'm not as worried about the offense. The thing I'm really worried about in this game is Rams offense versus Packers defense. And again, you wouldn't necessarily laugh to hear that about the Packers defense the last 8 years, but you'd kind of laugh to hear about the Rams offense. I don't think any of us are quite. My husband's from St. Louis. He's a huge Rams fan his whole life. So I watch a lot of the Rams, and I've watched many a sad Rams season go by. And I think it's still new to me and funny to me that we are so afraid of this, completely explosive Rams offense, because that's not a sentence you're really used to uttering.
No, it's nice for a change to have a winning season, granted, let alone have Sean McVay come in and completely change this team to elevate them to a playoff team first year. That is incredible to see from him. And then kind of going into that, Packers defense has got to be worried about the Rams offense, how high-flying they've been. Even with losing Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods can do it all for him, and Brandon Cooks is healthy this week. There's a lot of weapons they can just plug and play, and Gurley's all over the field. It's going to be hard for Packers to contain this offense. Absolutely.
And I think, Kupp obviously is a huge weapon, and it would be hard for them. I imagine, though, that he would be back by then. Do you have any idea?
They said he's sitting out. They said he's sitting out this week. They announced that, and it's a week-to-week after that. They said it's a 2 to 4 week injury, so he may or may not play. We'll buy him more after this week.
Yeah, I definitely, that would certainly, I think, be a bit of a blessing for the Packers if he wasn't in the mix as well. But I think exactly like you said, I'm so impressed with what I've seen by Robert Woods. And I think Robert Woods really has the ability to be almost like a Marquise Goodwin here and burn people like Kentrell Bryce and HaHa Clinton Dix down the field. And that could be, I think, a really tricky element of this game for the Packers is I think the Rams can just kill you on screen passes and runs by Gurley and short yards and then just open it up to Robert Woods and completely just leave your defense scratching its head. I think Sean McVay is the most talented play caller in the NFL. I wrote a profile on him earlier this year for Ozzy about some of the things he does and about some of the formations he uses, like the stacks and bunches that have made the Rams so hard to defend. And I think we've seen that the NFL is this like reactionary or copycat league. And a lot of the things we've seen, like the RPO stuff or the Eagles with their really simplified, almost like high school level offense. Those things have been figured out a little bit, but I think everyone's still kind of behind the curve in figuring out how to stop Sean McVay. And I don't think that's something anyone's going to figure out this year, let alone the Green Bay Packers defense.
I don't think Sean McVay's even done either. This year we saw a whole new offense where they're moving on wide receivers, tight ends, running backs, all over the formation on any given play, and you're not going to know who's coming at you and who's getting the ball. A lot of defenses are left scratching their head. Oh, here comes a screen or a kind of a sweep to the left. All of a sudden the running back's going all the way to the right, and then he throws a touchdown. I mean, there's so much this offense can do, and it's crazy to think that Sean McVay's opened up the playbook this year. And seeing that, what can he do next year even or later on this season? He hasn't shown us hardly anything.
Right. Which, if you're Mike McCarthy, I mean, I think he said something like he was going to enjoy last night's win and then get right to self-scouting. And it's like, yeah, he probably should spend the bye week self-scouting, and he should probably watch every single minute of Rams film that he can get his hands on, because especially with the way that Sean McVay communicates with Jared Goff and can sort of shake things up right up until the play clock runs out, I think it's proving impossible even for really great defenses to counteract this season, and the Packers are not a really great defense.
What do you see from the Packers? What do you need from the Packers maybe to have them win this game?
A miracle.
You really think the Packers are going to lose this one like 100%?
99.9%. Yeah. And it's, again, I'm not, oh my God, I can imagine like on Twitter, my mentions are going to be a hellscape. And I'm not hating on the Packers, and I'm not, I'm just from everything I've seen this year, these Rams look virtually unstoppable. They're so creative. They're clicking on all cylinders on offense and defense. And I think the Packers just have too many holes, mostly on defense. But I think, on the offense, knowing if they have Randall Cobb and Geronimo Allison to work with, obviously the bye really helps them there. That could, I think, certainly give them a boost. I mean, we certainly know they have sort of the firepower at wide receiver. I guess sort of what it comes down to is, can they have the right mix of, the pass to run ratio? Can they use their running backs in the best way? And also, can their offensive line hold up? I think that's another thing we haven't really talked about is, David Bakhtiari, I think anyone would be comfortable saying is one of the best left tackles in the league. But the Packers guard situation, they went from having two, Pro Bowl guards to they've got Lane Taylor, who's really taken a dive this season. Byron Bell is struggling in pass protection. And when you've got a quarterback who's gimpy, your pass protection has to be stellar. And I think, aside from Brian Bulaga and David Bakhtiari, this offensive line unit has been one of a lot of like no-name guys, I hate to say, but outside of Green Bay, I don't think a lot of casual NFL fans could name 3 of 5 starters on this line. So I think that's going to play a big role in it, especially when you're talking about Aaron Donald and especially when you're talking about that Rams front seven. And like I said, and that's the unit that I'm high on. I think that the Packers offense is its best chance to win this game. So those are already the problems with the offense. And then we've talked a lot about all the holes they have on defense. And ultimately, I think that faulty safety play and that lack of ability to bring a pass rush. I mean, if you give Jared Goff time, he's going to kill you. And I think, unfortunately, I don't necessarily think that it'll be a blowout by any means, but ultimately it's really hard for me to imagine that this Packers defense can just get the job done against this Rams offense.
I definitely agree with that. The Packers defense really has to step up and play smart in this game, but the Rams defense also is a little bit injured, considering we may not have to leave that game. I believe he has one more week out from injury at that point. And I did have the Packers as one of my two teams that would beat the Rams this year. I picked the Saints and Packers as the only two teams that could beat the Rams. I gave them a record of 14-2, just because you can never count out Aaron Rodgers, no matter how bad his defense plays, because he can just put on points right as he gets back on offense.
Right. And I think that's, it's sort of a tired song and dance at this point. I mean, I think even Devontae Adams said after this past game, you don't want every week to be a heart attack. And I think this is a Packers team where a lot of weeks this season, it might be a heart attack. If you give Aaron Rodgers time and if it's within 10 points, he's always in the mix and he can always bring you back. All it takes is getting the defense to jump off sides, one really great well-timed, connection. He can throw it obviously in a tighter window than probably anyone else in the NFL. I don't at all doubt Aaron Rodgers' ability. I sort of doubt the cast around him, especially on the other side of the ball. And I think we've just seen so many times this season, Aaron Rodgers sitting helpless on the bench, watching as the defense kind of gives away any advantage that he's managed to gain, just as we saw with the Packers sort of letting that healthy lead slip away on Monday.
So I want to ask you what's your matchup to look for in this game. Before I let you answer, for mine, I'm going to say it's special teams, just for the sake of Corey Littleton has blocked a couple punts and kicks this year, and definitely that could shake up Mason Crosby if that may happen this game. Seeing how he got shaken up 2 weeks ago, this could affect his mentality if he gets a block or two and kind of spiral from there. What's your matchup that you're going to be looking for in this game?
Yeah, I think that's really smart, first of all. I think that's definitely something to watch. I think for me, my matchup generally would be safeties on receivers. And I think specifically it would be Kentrell Brice or HaHa Clinton-Dix on Robert Woods. I just really didn't like what I saw from them against Goodwin at all on Monday. I think Goodwin and Woods can do a lot of the same kind of things. They can really burn you on deep routes. And I think in this game, unfortunately, all it takes is Brice or HaHa Clinton-Dix whiffing on a couple plays for Robert Woods to, haul in 60, 70-yard touchdowns. So I think that's, to me, where this game could be like the make or break matchup.
Do you think the Packers can stop Gurley in this game after we just saw him run for 200 yards after he watched Barkley run for 200, go like, hold my beer, basically. Let me show you how it's done.
Yeah, it's really hard to imagine because Gurley obviously is not only the most talented running back in the game, but I would say he's one of the most talented offensive weapons in the game right now because he can kill you through the air just as much as he can through the ground. The Packers, obviously, we talked about they have a little bit of trouble setting the edge. I guess, I've been impressed with what Dean Lowry's been able to do against the run. Obviously, Mike Daniels is a force against the run. It's not so much the defensive line. It's more the second level of the defense. But, this Green Bay team is one that has allowed 116 rushing yards per game. Todd Gurley could have 116 rushing yards, by the third quarter. So certainly I think that a lot of those averages we're seeing for the Packers defense are probably going to be worse after this game. Todd Gurley, no, they can't stop him. I think the best they can hope to do is contain him from just going lights out.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's hard to contain Gurley. We've seen that every week. Even when he's not getting a lot of rushing yards, he's killing you on the receiving end. And it just feels like there's nothing you can do to prevent him from hurting you in one way or the other. Going to the flip side of the ball, how do you protect Aaron Rodgers and kind of save him from Aaron Donald, the second highest most paid defender, and then Ndamukong Suh to match, and even Brockers as well?
Yeah, so I think a lot of that is going to come down to, we talked about the offensive line already. I think that's a given. They need to be better in pass protection. A lot of that falls on Lane Taylor and Byron Bell. But I think with that sort of being, I think, a given or obvious, I think a lot of this is on Mike McCarthy. I think a lot of it's on the play calling. You've got to be able to call, the Packers we've talked about in the past love to kind of do these ISO routes that take a long time to develop. And I think they've got to utilize some of the weapons they have at their disposal, like Aaron Jones and like Ty Montgomery, and even things like moving Devontae Adams into the slot or having Jimmy Graham in the slot, to give Aaron Rodgers sort of like quick release options where he can get the ball out quickly and not have to hop around in that pocket back there, because even though he can do magical things when he has a little bit of time to work in the pocket, I think you've got to make sure that your game plan gives him plenty of opportunities to kind of like get out of trouble early. Because if you're just looking for those plays to develop, that knee is obviously of the utmost importance. And against this defensive line, you don't want him touched.
I think in this game, the defensive front of the Rams is actually going to eliminate the run game for the Packers and is going to force Aaron Rodgers and Mike McCarthy to kind of game plan around throwing the ball a lot more. We may see Aaron Rodgers get to that 50 mark of attempts thrown or even higher, 60, just for the reason of the Rams have pretty much shut down the run game this year, minus the game in Seattle. And I think that continues this week because Packers don't get a lot of rushing yards regardless. And it may just happen again this week where they can get under 50 yards rushing.
Yeah, I think you might be right. And I think the way for them to combat that obviously would be somehow to get out to a lead so that they're able to be a little bit more balanced in their play calling. But I do think that probably we're going to see Aaron Jones and Ty Montgomery being used more in the passing game than in the rushing game for sure.
So kind of wrap this edition here of Between the Pylons. Thank you again for joining us, Michelle. My last question I have for you, you said ultimately the Rams are going to win this game, but what's your score prediction on this?
So am I right that the Rams haven't scored less than 30 all year? I'm pretty sure.
Seattle real quick, because I don't think they have scored under 30 outside that Seattle game. Maybe I'm just checking.
Yeah.
Where are we at? Seattle. So when they played Seattle, they scored 33. Yeah, so they haven't scored under 30.
So I can't have them going under 30 this game. I think obviously that's going to be my minimum here.
No. Broncos, they scored 23. So
Okay. Yeah, I thought they were over 30 every game, which obviously would be crazy. I know they're averaging 32 on the year, which is still crazy, but I'm going to put them at 30 on the nose, and I'll probably put the Packers at 21 to be realistic.
I'm going to set my numbers a little higher, I think, just because the offense is so explosive. I want to say 35 to 27, close around there, just to give the Rams. They're going to go over 30, expose the Packers defense, make their linebackers work, and then Aaron Rodgers is going to have to pull a fourth quarter, try to come back, and it may fall short. And a key interception with Peters taking a risky shot to get that interception that ends up paying off. So I think it's going to be Packers around 27, and it's going to end the game at that point.
Got it all planned out.
I call as I see it. I mean, just from seeing what Aaron Rodgers can do, he's going to have to force something, and it may be risky, especially when Peters likes to take chances at that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I think you're probably right. I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Rams get up to 35. I just don't know that the Packers can put up much more than 3 or 4 scores against this Rams defense.
So as of right now, just because I have one more question, this came to me. Where do you see this Packers record going? At this point in the season, as it stands today, do you see them getting to the playoffs, or do you think they fall short?
I think you definitely can't rule them out quite yet. We don't know what that NFC North division is going to look like in a few weeks. In week 5, I did tweet something along the lines of, it's not insane to say that the Packers could finish 4th place in the NFC North. And people freaked out, of course. They were like, it's only week 5. And I was like, I'm not saying it will happen. I'm saying that it's not insane to say it. I think that tie is a real thorn in their side, unfortunately. And it's kind of like this baggage they have to drag throughout the rest of the season. I think as long as the Bears can go back to what I think we all believed they would be this year, which is certainly a team on the rise, but not like contending to lead in the NFC North. If the Bears can kind of, return to, I think, what we all expected to be their form, I still, I'm not surprised the Packers and Vikings kind of duke it out for 1-2 in the division. And I think like last year, hopefully that should be enough to have the second place team earn a wild card berth. I'm not sure that the NFC South is a team that sent 3 teams to the playoffs last year. I'm not sure the Buccaneers get things going. The Falcons have been inexplicable this season. I can't believe that they're sitting at 2-4 right now. I don't think the Lions are going to scare anybody. Obviously the 49ers are pretty much out of it. The Cardinals, no way. The Seahawks, I just don't know who they are. The Giants, no way. The thing that scares me, I think, is the NFC East. I think the Redskins, Cowboys, and Eagles could be the division that steals away, those 2 wild cards. And then obviously you'd have the second place finisher in the NFC North out in the cold. So I guess that's sort of what I would watch out for. And again, with that tie, the Packers, if they end up, oh God, I'm going to mess up the math, but like they'd have to be, 10-5-1, or 9-6-1 to be
in contention. I mean,
in contention, yeah.
That's even hard at 9 games because the NFC is so talented. 9 games barely even guarantees you even a playoff spot, like a wild card.
Right, and the only reason I say it is because at least the tie doesn't count as a loss. But ultimately, yeah, I think it is going to take 10 games even with that tie. And, I think these Packers could absolutely be a 10-win team. I just don't know if the Cowboys and the Eagles also can be. I think they maybe could. And I was pretty low on the Cowboys this year, but at 3-3, you can't really count them out. And I assume that the Eagles have to get it together.
I've been saying this all year long, and I didn't believe in the Eagles last year, and I certainly don't believe them this year. I thought last year they just kind of got hot at the right time, especially with Carson Wentz. And we kind of saw Foles kind of fall apart at the beginning of the season. Wentz comes back, still getting kind of used to it, getting into the motions of it. I think the Eagles were found out, and this year they're finding out the harsh reality that everyone's figured out their offense and knows that their defensive line is a strong point, and the rest of the defense you can attack and get your points. So I think Eagles miss the playoffs. Dallas is going to miss the playoffs. Giants miss the playoffs. And I think Redskins kind of walk away with this division with 3 games up.
Yeah, I think that can be totally possible. I'm not as low on the Eagles as you are, but I do think probably if you're giving me Packers and Vikings over Cowboys and Eagles, I'm feeling, even though they have that tie, sort of like a scarlet letter right now, I'm feeling better about the Packers and Vikings as things stand, just because there's so much talent on those teams.
The offense is way much better in both. The passing game for Dallas isn't there. There's no offense hardly in the Giants organization until they make a change at quarterback. So I think it's just hard to say for those 2 teams to really make a playoff push. So I think Vikings and Packers way better than anything that the NFC East can bring to us.
Yeah. I hope you're right.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Michelle. If you want to check out more about her, where can they check you out, Michelle?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Michelle Bruton, Bruton. And I also run, so I work for Aussie as the sports editor, and I'm a reporter as well. And I run our sports Twitter, which is at Aussie Sports on Twitter. I would love it if you would give it a follow. It's my fledgling that I've been trusted to grow this season. A lot of good sports content on there. And yeah, otherwise, my work is a little fewer and farther between now because it's a lot of sort of longer features and trend pieces and things that require a lot of reporting and research, but I will always share them on Twitter. And I spend all of my life on Twitter, so I'll be happy to chat with you over there.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Michelle. You can check out this podcast on Spreaker. We're working on getting this Between the Pylons on iTunes. So you'll be seeing that coming up here shortly. But you can check this out, listen to it all week before the preview. The Rams and Packers play against each other. Again, you can catch us on Spreaker. We'll also post it on SoundCloud. And check us out on Twitter, the Pylon to Pylon podcast. And thank you guys for listening this week. This is your host, Skyler Burkhart, joined by Michelle Bruton. Thank you so much again, Michelle.
Thank you so much.
All right, guys. Have a great night.